All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Liberty Lens right here. I'm your host, Big John, along with my friend and co-host, Mr. Mike Termott. Mike, how are you doing today?
Good to be with you. I'm doing well. And just so that your viewers and listeners are aware, you and I are in a gang, and we're going to spend some time talking about gangs today.
Now, I don't have any tattoos, so I'm not going to get stopped in the street, I hope.
I don't have any you know about either.
Let's keep it that way, Mike. All right. Okay, fair enough. So, you kind of teased the subject of today's episode, which is we're going to talk about the case of Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, Mr. Garcia. Now, depending
Mr.
on
Abrego.
Mr. Abrego.
He's going to go by Abrego if he's got four names. We can call him Abrego Garcia. My recommendation is we just call him Kilmar tonight.
Kilmar. Okay, let's call him Kilmar then.
We'll go by his first name.
Kilmar. Okay. Now, and depending on who you believe, Mike, this is either a violent MS-13 gang member or he's
Which is redundant, by the way.
Correct. Very redundant. My bad. Or he's a Maryland father, father and husband of, and he's got 3 special needs kids that have been left to fend for themselves in Maryland. So why such divergent opinions, Mike?
Well, I think for a couple different reasons. Number one, both things can be true. And I suspect that both of them are a little bit true. There's no question that he's married and lives in Maryland. He's married to an American citizen. He is not an American citizen. He came here when he was 16.
Yes.
He came from El Salvador. He came from El Salvador and he came illegally. The administration wanted to deport him, and he was arrested before the deportation order came. He was arrested standing with a bunch of other guys who were illegal, trying to work illegally, right? They were arrested by some local police. I think it was Prince George's County. I think it was around here where I am in Virginia. I think it was in Maryland. He was arrested, and then there was a deportation order out for him. After he was arrested, there was a bail hearing. And in the bail hearing, someone said that he is a gang member. There's a lot of reason to believe, based on what we've heard about that testimony, that it was not true, that the testimony was false. Not necessarily a lie. Could have been someone made a mistake, right?
Right.
But there are certain reasons to believe it wasn't true. For example, it was alleged that he was a member of a gang in New York where he had never been, right? So that's a little bit weird to begin with. On the other hand, you could randomly guess that a 16-year-old from El Salvador was probably at least approached by MS-13. Remember that Mara Salvatrucha, MS-13, is a gang from Los Angeles, exported from the United States to El Salvador, that was created to protect Salvadoran immigrants to Los Angeles, to protect them from other gangs. And they became horrifically violent starting in the 1980s. It exported to El Salvador in the 1990s.
Right.
So it would make total sense that he were, even if he didn't want to be a member, it makes total sense that he would be, notwithstanding the extreme sketchiness of the testimony against him, which was never adjudicated. They weren't able to, nail down the witnesses, and then eventually the deportation order came and then was immediately stayed. The court ordered that, notwithstanding the deportation order, it was to be withheld from executing the deportation order because the court said if he were sent back to El Salvador, there was a better than 50-50 chance that he would be in trouble. He could be killed, or he could be subject to a great deal of violence. And so it was ordered that he remain in the United States and had to check in with ICE annually, which apparently he has done. So he's never been convicted of a crime. He's never even been accused of a crime other than seeking work illegally. And of course, coming into the United States illegally, which
Right.
is
And
not a
Mike,
crime, but it's
right.
illegal.
I just wanted to jump in here and just clarify at least one or two things. So he did come into the country as a 16-year-old, and I think it's also important to take context into it, right? He was a 16-year-old looking for work, came here in 2019 as a 16-year-old. Now, yes, he came
Came
in
in
illegal.
2011 as a 16-year-old.
2011, I apologize, yes. And here's the thing. That order that the immigration judge or court or hearing gave him essentially put him in a limbo, right? It didn't make him a permanent resident. It didn't make him a citizen by any stretch of the imagination, but it also ruled that he was allowed to stay in this country. And I think that's an important distinction because right now, if you or I were to refer to him as an illegal immigrant or occupant or whatever the administration language is, technically you and I would be wrong, correct?
It's tricky. It depends on exactly which words you use.
Okay, fair enough.
He is, in a sense, an illegal immigrant to the United States. No one disputes the fact that he came to the United States illegally.
Correct.
Now, he is here legally in the sense that a court has said you cannot deport him to El Salvador.
Right.
Yes, the administration could pursue a different deportation order someplace else if someplace else would take him, but that would require, going through the hearing process all over again. And there's no reason to believe that it's legal to deport someone to a different nation under
a third party, yeah.
Alien Enemies Act, which is how this whole thing started. That's a little bit in limbo. That hasn't been completely adjudicated yet, but it's on its way. Right. So, yeah, to your point, the administration did give him a work permit. Okay. So, that's maybe more legal than illegal. No one is suggesting that there's an order to get him out now.
Yeah. And also the other thing, which I think you mentioned, which is also very important, was it's not like they rounded him up because he was doing something criminal or illegal. Like he was just, as far as I understand, Mike, maybe you've heard differently, he was just a guy trying to find work, provide for his family there. And it's not like they caught him running drugs or running a protection racket or violent history or anything like that.
You're exactly right. That was the initial idea behind which he was arrested. Now, in that bail hearing attached to that arrest, someone shoots off his mouth, possibly correctly, possibly incorrectly. Like I say, very shady, shoots off his mouth and says, "Hey, this guy is Mara Salvatrucha." And that was never proven one way or another. It was never fully adjudicated. And so it just kind of hung there, showed up on a list for the Trump administration in 2025, 6 years later. And they decide, hey, he's going on a list. He's out of here. It was later revealed by the Justice Department, oops, a mistake was made, that he wasn't supposed to be sent out of the United States. He got on the list by mistake. They haven't fully articulated what that mistake was. The spokesperson for the White House said it was a clerical error. Okay. I think our suspicion is that the administration just accidentally didn't see, overlooked the order to withhold the deportation order, right? They saw the deportation order and the fact that he was alleged to have been MS-13. The administration has tagged MS-13 as a terrorist organization, which you and I discussed some weeks ago. Yeah. And that could be argued round or square, right? I think at the time, a whole lot of folks were dubious that was an appropriate designation. I remember I said, I think most people are going to give the administration some leeway here.
Yes, yes.
That maybe a lot of people wouldn't have done that, but at least you understand it, right? These are very
Right,
violent organizations that cross international borders, and it's hard to deal with them.
right, right. That part of it is not a hill I think too many of us want to die on, right? Whether or not MS-13 is a terrorist organization, a violent organization, or just, bad eggs. It's like, okay, fair enough.
They're definitely violent. They're definitely an organization. They
Right,
definitely terrorize. We'll leave it to the listener to decide whether they meet the
right, right.
definition required by the law.
Now, and I'm going to play Joe Pollyanna here with you, Mike. Okay, let's take the administration at its original word. They made a clerical error. They uh, put Kilmar on a plane and sent him to El Salvador. By the way, not to a nice place. I think most of us would agree he got sent to a El Salvadoran hellhole of a prison. And
Yes, which we will discuss in a moment because that
yes,
prison is relevant for a couple of very, very different reasons.
yes, yes, yes. So, okay, let's take them at their word. They made a clerical error. Why aren't they happy to correct that error right now?
Well, I think for a couple different reasons, mostly revolving around politics. And if there's anything that I have said to you probably too many times over the past few weeks, it is that I believe that the Trump administration is not serving the president well in terms of staff expertise, advice, and execution. My strong advice would be if I were trying to help the administration accomplish its long-term goals, my advice would be bring this guy back, throw him into court, get it adjudicated, and then send him back to El Salvador. That sounds like a wicked pain in the neck. It would be a wicked pain in the neck, but that's how I would play this. And I don't think it would be all that difficult. I think they would win those cases, to be honest. If they were to bring him back, they would quite possibly get the withheld removed. They believe that they would, by the way. They believe strongly that they could get the hold removed from the original deportation order.
Right.
And then they could deport them over again, or they could explore a third country that would take them, or they could just, drop the whole thing. But the administration is setting up an argument, a showdown with courts here, I believe intentionally, in order to gain ultimately greater power for the administration so they have greater leeway in dealing with these immigration issues because they believe it's the politically expedient thing to do, but they also believe, I think, that it's the right thing to do. I think that they believe they were elected to deal with violent criminals, especially in the immigration space. This is one way to do it, and they're going to do it for all it's worth. They're going to take as big a bite of the apple as possible. So, we all get that. As libertarians, we're a little bit nervous about the constitutional issues here, which is why you and I are discussing it, not
Right.
because we think that members of MS-13 are the kind of folks we want living in Maryland.
Right. Well, and that's another great point. Like the due process of this is being treated by the Trump administration like it's just an inconvenient. I feel like I'm caught up in some weird, like Cuban like Castro's Cuba version of Dirty Harry or something. Like the law is only there to impede us from dishing out justice, and I'll tie that in later. But I want to set that up now for a callback, Mike. See, old director here. But anyway, here's the thing, right? So Homan, especially, I saw him on one of the shows the other day where he says, look, why are we doing this? Okay, let's say we bring him back. We'll give him a quick trial. We'll get him out of here, or we'll send him someplace else. Why even bother? And to your point, okay, you're right. They may eventually bring him back, try him. They'll find him guilty of something, or they'll find him in violation of something. I get all that. Talk to us why the due process here. Why don't we libertarians agree with Homan? I mean, if we're just going to bring him back to throw him out again, why go through it, Mike? Isn't that a waste of taxpayer money?
It's a good expenditure of taxpayer money because your rights are on the line, and so are mine, and a whole lot of people who are better citizens and better neighbors than MS-13 members. The reason this is an interesting case is because if it's true that he is an MS-13 member, or if it is true that he's just a bad guy for whatever reasons, uh, it makes it the kind of case worth looking at, because it's not a matter of protecting his rights because he's so terrific. It's only a matter of protecting his rights per se. And the reason that we want to protect those rights is because once you give them away, any administration, this one or the next one, could use that latitude to prosecute people, to detain, to arrest, to deport people for less than they would otherwise be able to. We want due process to protect each one of us from such a thing. And it's worth mentioning here that this is a constitutional issue, but I believe a lot of Americans are being fed this backwards.
Mhm.
In other words, the constitutional issue here is not a matter of what are your rights. The constitutional issue here is, what is it that the Constitution allows the government to do? Remember that our rights, your rights, humans' rights, don't come from the American Constitution.
Yes,
And in
correct.
that sense, it's extremely important for us to remember, because it's not a matter of whether or not you're a US citizen.
Correct.
Your rights come from a higher authority, whether they come from, as a matter of faith, your God, or they come just as a natural course because you're a human being.
Right.
They certainly do not exist because of the US Constitution. Your rights are your rights because you're a grown-ass adult.
Correct.
And so the real issue here is, according to what authority does the government of the United States, much less the Trump administration, this really isn't about, how do you feel about Donald Trump or his DOJ or Tom Homan or anything else. This really is about whether the government, the federal government of the United States, or any other branch of the government of the United States has the authority to pick up someone and move them by force anywhere, much less to a prison, to pick them up and move them from 12th Street to 13th Street against their will by force without due process.
Right.
This is the issue, truly. And it shouldn't be a matter of how you feel about the Trump administration, and it shouldn't be how you feel about Kilmar. It really is about whether the government, any government, but here in America, our government, whether it has the authority, whether we should allow it to have the authority to move someone by force, and in this case, move them outside of the United States and imprison them without a hearing. And this
Yeah.
is what gives libertarians tremendous pause, because it is very difficult to argue that the Constitution, in its existence as we read it today, that the Constitution gives the authority to the government to do such a thing.
Yeah, and you're so spot on, Mike, because that is the thing, and that's a battle, honestly, that I think I see having to be made constantly right now, which is, you see a lot of people saying, oh, constitutional rights only apply to American citizens. They don't apply to outsiders. And it's, no, to your point, very well said by you. These are human rights that the Constitution says the government cannot infringe upon. That is the difference between what made this nation as great as it was. Not industrial jobs, Mike, but the understanding that we have rights that are not derivative of government. and to now have to fight that ideological battle is such a disservice to everybody. And to your point, whether it was the Trump administration or the Biden administration or any administration you want, to trample rights and to do so without any sort of due process. I would ask people listening uh, to this episode who are not necessarily libertarians. They just think Mike Tremont's a handsome dude and they tune in just to catch an eyeful of him every so often.
Right. All the people with bad eyesight. I get it. You got a weird
Okay.
audience. Keep going.
Um, if you're walking down the street and these ICE guys roll up to you with their black hoodies and their face masks like they are wont to do, throw you in the back of the van just because you have a tattoo they think might be a sign of a MS-13 initiation, without due process, how will you prove to them that you are in fact an American citizen, that even if you believe your rights are yours because you're an American citizen, without without due process rather, how would you prove it? Like, they're not letting you whip out your wallet and say, well, here's my driver's license. They're not letting you say, let me call my lawyer. They're throwing you in the back of a van, and the next thing you know, you're on a flight to El Salvador or wherever they think you may have originated from. And at that point, they apparently don't care whether you end up in a prison, concentration camp, or luxury hotel. They're like, just get out of here and so I think that is
Sure.
something, speak to that. How do you, if without due process, if you're an American citizen, just incorrectly nabbed on the street, which has happened, by the way, that's not a hypothetical. This
Well, of course,
administration
it
has
happens
admitted to
all the
that.
time.
Yeah,
And this is why courts have weighed in for 200 years in a very detailed and exacting way about what it is that we allow police officers to do. For example, I was a cop for
right,
11 and a half years. Court cases circumscribe very carefully in a very detailed fashion what it is that a police officer is and what it is a police officer is not allowed to do. We allow police officers to detain people only under certain situations, to
right,
arrest people only under certain situations. You need to be able to articulate what those issues are that give you the authority to detain or to arrest someone. And then immediately there is a hearing required and then an arraignment. We do not detain people just because the government is pissed off. And we understand that in this case, the government was elected to be pissed off. We recognize that governments are elected out of motivation. It is true. When the Trump administration says, well, this is what we were elected for, I respect that. Whether you agree or disagree with the voters or what it is that he
right.
was elected for, or whether that was a good idea or how he's going about their plans or yada, 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 whether you agree or disagree with any of that, we have a system in which administrations are elected to do certain things and they have strong motivations to get those done. When democracy works well, by the way, that's the upside of democracy, is that you can motivate your government to do something through elections. Okay, so you got this motivated government trying to do something, good for them for being energetic. But when that bumps up against the limits of the Constitution, that's where we need the courts to step in to protect rights, to adjudicate particular cases where people just see this differently. And that happens all the time. First of all, there are mistakes made. Second of all, there are different interpretations of the law. Third, there are changes over time in interpretations of the law. And number four, interpretations of the facts. So it does get complicated. In this particular case, the family of Kilmar Garcia sued the federal government in Maryland, and the judge, Paula Zinnis, a good Greek, by the way, you would appreciate that. Paula, I won't continue to try to pronounce her last name, but Paula ruled that the government was being candid about saying that a mistake had been made and wants this guy returned. And the government is saying they don't have control over the situation. We can't get him back. And now Paula's mad. And I think we get that, right?
Right.
Paula seems like she's trying to be reasonable, and the government is trying to convince us that it's being reasonable in saying, now, I think a lot of people are going to find this unreasonable, but the government's case is, look, he's outside of the United States. He's no longer under our control. We can't get him back. And now the administration has changed from that original posture to, you know what? Our policy has changed, and we no longer feel like it was a mistake to send him out. And Paula ain't having that.
Mm.
So there is a showdown coming, right? Now, this has already gone to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that it was a mistake, that he was illegally deported. The Supreme Court ruled that the United States government needs to facilitate his return.
Interesting word there, facilitate.
Interesting word here, because Paula had said, you need to facilitate and effectuate his return. Effectuate is probably one of those fancy words that you use all the time, but I don't. But okay. Apparently what Paula was saying was, you not only need to make it easy for him to get back, but you got to make it happen, right? And the Supreme Court said, you know, we recognize this could be tricky and we may not be able to force you to get him back. Well, that created a loophole, and now the government is saying we can't get him back. Right. So Paula's asking for updates. She's not getting them, and now she's mad.
Yeah, she may start finding the government on a daily basis, one of those like $1 million a day till he's here.
Which you and I are going to pay for in terms of inflation.
Right. So here's the thing, right? Everything you said is correct. Now, the two key points here. One is we've heard a lot from the Trump administration, and we've discussed it in earlier Liberty Lens, that they are on this sort of like a legal jihad to invalidate federal court orders, meaning from the federal circuit judges, what they term as activist judges, what they term as Democrat liberal activist judges, right? So it's important to note here that in this case, the Supreme Court, which presumably is the one that has saved Mr. Trump's bacon a couple of times in the past, that unanimously 9-0, which means you can't even claim that it was a split decision, that it was, you know, this and that. Unanimous decision says, bring this guy back. Now, so against that backdrop.
Said facilitate bringing him back. It was a split decision in the sense they dropped the word effectuate. Right.
Right. But they said, so you have to wiggle room.
Facilitate getting him back.
Right. Okay. Now, intertwined in all this, and this is what's fascinating, it's not like this one case and one set of facts. There's all this intertwined stuff. And to some extent, this is either the genius or the evil of the Trump administration, right? That everything is so intertwined that you start to see patterns. Like if you're an analyst or a pattern recognition guy, you start to see stuff, right? First of all, this is not the first time the Trump administration has fallen on the excuse of, oh, you know what? We were so diligent in our execution of our duties that by the time you gave us the order to have the person stay in the U.S., we had already shipped them out. They did it to that surgeon up at Logan Airport, right? They deported her, and then after she was gone, the order came through.
Surgeon from the university's medical center, right?
Yes. Oh, did that order come too late? Somehow it didn't get to us in time. Oh, well, she's gone. Same thing here, right? It's like we got rid of him so fast. But what's interesting, when President, El Salvadorian President Bukele, see, we had practiced that before the show. But anyway, Bukele was in Washington, did the big press op, you know, the song and dance with President Trump. Couple of things. Both of them, when they was brought up, I think by Caitlin Collins, like, hey, what's going to happen with this guy? What's going to happen to old Kilmar? Both President Trump and President Bukele said, we don't even know where he is. We have no idea where he is. He's somewhere in El Salvador. He's in this prison. We can't find him, which already sounds like nonsense, right? Like, hey, you have a prisoner.
Nonsense.
Right. You have a prisoner that you agree has now, for the good of the populace, is behind bars. but you can't figure out which bars he's behind, which cell he's in, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Pursuant to that, Mike, and I'll let you talk, I just want to throw this in. Whether it was a hot mic or from a distance, President Trump was heard telling President Bukele, hey, you got to build more of those prisons.
Yeah.
Because we're going to send more people over to you.
Yep.
Bukele's response, and I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me, he said something along, well, to save 350 million, you got to round up a few and blah, 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 to that effect.
Right.
And Trump said something like, hey, maybe even some citizens too. That was caught on the mic.
How it went, and I think the suggestion was 5 more prisons. Okay, background on Bukele. Bukele
he's an interesting character. Yeah,
he is an interesting character. President Trump called him one of his favorite dictators recently, which is a weird thing to say. And I recognize, when building foreign relations, we sometimes say weird things. So I don't mean to suggest it was necessarily the wrong thing to say. I think I'm going to put that in the category of stuff I wouldn't have said.
Right.
But,
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Bukele was a member of a larger political party for some time. He had a falling out with that party. He is a professional marketer, professional advertising executive, launched quite successfully his own agency, helped start a new political party, became the mayor of, now I don't remember where. It might have been the capital. But anyway, he worked his way up. He became president, ran out his term. The Constitution was reinterpreted to mean that he actually could run again, even though before he was in office, the interpretation of their Constitution was that consecutive terms were not allowed. Let me know if anything, rhymes with anything going on in the United States, right?
You beat me to it, Mike, but okay, go ahead.
This is a guy who came to power saying he was going to get crime under control, and did. This was El Salvador was one of the most dangerous places. By the way, it's still fairly dangerous. Don't, let me suggest that it's like rural Virginia where I live. It's not. But it was one of the most horrifically homicidal, one of the most horrifically dangerous places in the world. I have been there myself.
It was 30 when he took office the second time. It was 38 murders per 1,000 people annually, and
absolutely astounding, and biased toward women and biased toward young people.
And he did get it down to, I believe, 2.5 per 1,000. So
he got it down by an order of magnitude. Crazy. He arrested dozens of thousands of persons. There are those who argue that due process was not followed, that the Constitution was reinterpreted, and these prisons, this particular prison that we're discussing, was constructed for this purpose, to house prisoners, gang members, as a result of his crackdown on gang activity in order to get crime under control pursuant to a political mandate. He was wildly popular. He was early in his career, he was viewed as a leftist. Now he's considered a populist conservative. Let me know if any of that rhymes with anything going on in the United States. So, there's a lot going on in El Salvador that certain folks in the administration look to and say, there's a guy who's got it going on, who's figured out a few things. Now, it's also worth mentioning that we have in the United States already crossed the Rubicon in years past as far as hiring contractors to house prisoners. That is something that we have legally learned to tolerate, at least in most states. It's typically a state-by-state issue. However, having said that, if in state X, Y, or Z, you are imprisoned in a private sector managed prison. You are still a prisoner of the state. You are still under the control of the state. And so the administration here is trying to argue something that I think is going to be an uphill battle for them to win, which is he's out of our control because he is in a prison that we don't run. I don't think that that's going to fly. Now, having said that, it is a little bit complicated. Imagine he is a Salvadoran citizen. He is in El Salvador. And notwithstanding whatever Bukele may say, he may not know where this guy is, but someone does. The government of El Salvador knows where this guy is, right? Well, put yourself in their shoes. You're getting paid to house them. You've got a contract you like. And the way you came to power was cracking down on gang members. And someone outside of the country says, yeah, we need this guy back. I can see a populist politician saying, I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, especially when they're getting paid by the U.S. government 25 grand. They're getting paid 25 grand a year to keep this guy in prison. By the way, who knows if he's still alive or not? It might be like those Social Security things that Doge says they found, like 150-year-old people getting Social Security checks allegedly, right?
Nobody ever dies in prison.
So he could always continue to live in prison now at 25 grand a year. And what's interesting here is that you're absolutely right. When you kept saying, what does this look like? What does this rhyme with? What is it? This is Trump's fever dream that he wants to have, right? He's Dirty Harry. It reminds me of the old Judge Dredd thing. If you're a comic book fan, punish the guilty, keep the innocent nervous. That was Judge Dredd's motto. That seems to be the motto here. There is no doubt that Bukele has rounded up people that he didn't bother sifting through who was innocent and who was guilty. He just rounded everybody up. If you were innocent, you were collateral damage. And when he's pressed on it, I've seen some clips where he goes into this diatribe. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Tell me about the due process of victim X. Tell me the due process of this raped woman. Tell me the due process of this murdered daughter. So,
which politically speaking is very, very powerful.
It's very
populist message is very powerful. But we recognize that dichotomy between criminal and victim, or between criminal and the rest of us, while popular, is what drives an undermining of our civil liberties. Because in a democracy where we're all voting, the vast majority of us believe we'll never be on the other side of that argument. The vast majority of us believe there's no way that we'll be caught up in something so horrendous as an accusation that we're a gang member. Right? So, to support an elected administration that maybe skirts through due process a little bit quick, for the vast majority of voters in El Salvador or in the United States or in any other democracy or any other nation, that's a very powerful, very politically popular angle to take.
It is, Mike, and it's sad because, again, you hear the administration trumpeting this and the whole due process for victims, which is an oxymoronic concept, right? It's like you don't apply due process to victims, right? They don't need due process. They've been victimized. So, but this populist message keeps resonating. I heard Stephen Miller came and say, what are we supposed to do? Adjudicate all 13 million that we're trying to kick out of this country? Yeah, that's why a lot of us suggested.
It's a pain in the ass, Stephen.
Yeah, because that's exactly what a lot of us said during the election. How do you physically remove 13 million people without trampling on rights? Here's the answer we're learning. You don't. You trample the rights of everyone else to get rid of these 13 million people, if that's your goal.
And that was the idea behind the Enemy Aliens Act.
Alien Enemies Act, yeah.
Is that in effect, it allows for martial law.
Yeah, and it's that. Now, the other scary thing, I remember I brought this up to you a while ago, and you started saying, it's just a little political talk, I think, which was the very loud ruminations coming from Trump and others saying, hey, I'm going to run for a third term. I don't care what the Constitution says. I'm going to be president for a third term. Well, on Bill Maher's show last week, he had as a guest Steve Bannon. And Bannon came on very sternly, with that sort of like, he goes, mark my words, President Trump will serve a third term when this current term is up. And when Maher pointed out, he goes, I knew you were going to say that. Here's the Constitution. He read the Constitution. He goes, yeah, none of that matters. He'll be president for a third term. Now, this is Bannon. And the reason it makes sense is not because I think there's any validity to the constitutional notion of Trump running for a third term. There isn't. That's one of the few clauses that's very black and white. No third term, right? So they're cooking something up along the lines of Mike Pence can overturn the election, by refusing to certify the vote type of thing. It sounds like a John Eastman type of crackpot theory coming up again. So, Mike, when you throw all this together, right? So he's trying to emulate what Bukele's doing. He's dead focused on getting rid of what he views as 13 million criminals, which we view as displaced people. He's openly, and his circle is openly talking about defying the Constitution. We see that in essence, they're defying a Supreme Court order right now with their little word games. How concerned are you? How concerned are you that this becomes, not to overuse a hack phrase, but a constitutional crisis where, to some extent, you will get martial law? We have King Trump until he keels over. How concerned are you?
I'm not too concerned yet. The reason I'm not too concerned is not because what you just said is in some sense incorrect. Yeah, Steve did say that. I think Steve is wrong for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that President Biden became president too, right? Even if there are some goofballs inside the administration who try to make that happen, I just don't think that they're going to be able to do so. I don't think at the end of the day, the Republican Party is going to be having it, for example. I think there's a whole lot of people who wouldn't have it. Now, with regard to these court cases, some of them are important. I think those that are really important will hold. That's the good news. And if the administration decides to disregard important case rulings against them, I think that will erode their popularity. And that's the one thing that will hold them back, is that people are paying attention to some of these, not in a detailed way, not to most of them, but to some of them and to a certain extent. And so it's not going to be any one particular case. And this is why I continue to say that President Trump is being served by bad staff work. I really believe that the administration is risking its popularity on court cases that it doesn't need. It would be different if, for example, they didn't get the favorable ruling on the AEA, which they did. The Supreme Court said that you could use the AEA for the Secretary of State to decide to deport people. Wow, that was huge. That was huge. And so this is a great way for the administration to skirt around due process. Now, as a libertarian, that may give me the heebie-jeebies, but I think that that's going to allow the administration to do things without coming to a constitutional crisis. It's going to give them a huge bite of the deportation apple. And if they would learn to take yes for an answer, they would put themselves in a better spot. But they keep pushing until they will eventually lose cases and erode their popularity. That's how I see it at the moment. Obviously, things can change, but I don't believe that this is going to just continue to, put the administration in a position to continue to even want to run roughshod over court decisions.
And I've always wondered, what is a mechanism for enforcing a Supreme Court order? Because in my life, I have never seen where the Supreme Court has issued an order where there wasn't a mechanism by which that order could be implemented. So even if you think of like desegregation, right? Kennedy could deploy the guard, right? He could deploy the army, right?
But he had to choose to do so.
Correct. He had to choose to do so, but he had a
What
mechanism
if he
to do it.
didn't?
Correct. We never got to that point. That's why I'm saying I've never seen it
Yeah,
up
but
until now.
to your point, I mean, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
If the administration is the one that is the enforcer and the administration decides not to, what do you got?
Well, I wanted to pose that to you as a thought experiment here. Okay, so let's say the Supreme Court, the next unanimous ruling is worded more directly. So it doesn't say facilitate, but it says get that neurosurgeon back on from wherever she is, Syria or whatever, pay for her ticket, get her back to Logan, and have her cutting people up within 24 hours. Let's say it came out explicitly
Or it
like
could
that.
be anything. It could be, bring me a box of chocolates by Friday at 4.
Right.
And Pam Bondi says no.
Right. What happens?
What are you going to do?
Yeah. The Constitution's preferred method is impeachment at that point, right? Like, you would hope, but we know impeachment's not going to go anywhere for at least 2 years.
Well, everyone's going to have to impeach everyone.
Well, that's the point.
The administration's going to want to impeach the judge, but Congress, 48% of Congress is going to want to impeach the administration. Everyone's going to be impeaching everyone.
Yeah. And Mike, I'm going to wrap this up with another hypothetical that we keep going back to. Just remember, what goes around comes around. What you thought was cool today politically, your enemies will use against you.
Absolutely.
The next Democratic administration might decide that all those J6ers that got pardoned need to be deported to El Salvador or to Honduras or wherever Trump decides to build these private prisons.
Minneapolis, right?
Overseas, right? I mean,
right. Which is why, I agree, and it is prescient, and it does happen, right? Yeah. I mean, it's not like the Biden administration wasn't violating the Constitution; it absolutely was.
Yeah.
I mean, you look no further than the student loan fiasco, right?
Absolutely.
And a lot of other, and the pardons at the end of the administration was awfully weird. Horrible. So this is not just about the Trump administration. To your point, it's not just about the Trump administration. But this is why I've often said that a libertarian-minded administration should be testing these cases in order to steelman the arguments in reverse. In other words, a libertarian-minded administration should be suing to prevent the AEA from being used too expansively.
Yes.
Should be suing to prevent military interventionism without congressional support, right? And setting it up in a way that is more resilient, not just an executive order. It's one thing, use your imagination. Some libertarian someday is inaugurated on the and in the afternoon of January 20, she starts with these executive orders repealing all of the Biden and all of the Trump and all of the Bush, all the bullshit for eons and eons. How long does that last? As you and I have seen, it doesn't last all that long.
Right.
But if there was a Justice Department that were going to the Supreme Court in order to get test cases, going to the Supreme Court with test cases in order to adjudicate how the administration felt about limiting its own power, that would be something that could last a lot longer. And in my view, would serve the Constitution much better.
Right, because they're actually arguing to limit their own power, which is really Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. And I think that's a great point to end on that. Yes, personal feelings about Kilmar, one way or the other. It's a trial balloon. And again, the Trump administration loves these cases. They're pushing, they're pushing, they're pushing. And our friend Larry Sharp said this on the 50th anniversary episode of Free for All. He said they're picking people out initially that are sympathetic to prove that they can do it. So
Absolutely.
they threw out the
Absolutely.
kid from Colombia who was here legally, married to an American citizen. Get him out. Oh, this really great person by all accounts who's saving lives up in Massachusetts. Kick her out. Now you got this guy. He's got a sympathetic story, if nothing else, at home with the 3 kids and the American wife. Send him to a hellhole. He's disappeared. We don't even know if he's alive or not.
Well, I think that
That's
that's true. I also think that the administration just makes a heck of a lot of mistakes. All administrations make a heck of a lot of mistakes, right?
right.
Uh, I was a cop for 11 and a half years. Trust me, human beings make mistakes on
Sure.
both ends of the equation. And I worked for the White House for a couple of years. I know administrations make mistakes, notwithstanding what anyone would characterize as good faith efforts.
Sure.
And I think the administration makes mistakes and then reacts to them in ways that do not serve the president's interests well in the long run. I think that accept President Trump the way he is, right?
Right.
Suppose that you thought President Trump was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I don't mean to imply that he's the opposite. I don't mean to imply
Right.
that at all. Just accept him for a moment the way he is. He would benefit from a tightly libertarian chief of staff.
Hmm.
Just saying.
Who wouldn't, Mike? Who wouldn't? You think of anybody who wouldn't be well served by a libertarian chief of
Yeah,
staff?
John Kennedy. He would have been dead sooner.